Is there any anger in you? Any
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is.
Talk about that. Tell me what the anger is. What?
So what happened then? Because that's the point then that I didn't hear very much about what you
Well, that's when my recluse
would...
period started.
Yeah.
I started generally what I considered a recluse period, where I was confined in my bedroom.
You've spoken in the past about your illness
Yes.
and the role it plays in you having become a writer.
Yes.
Do you think it's the reason you became a writer?
So in this video I'm going to be looking at the archetype of the struggling or maybe obsessive artist, trying to dig into how maybe something to do with their mental framework or personal experience can cause such an absorbed or possibly even addictive relationship with their practice.
And I've been making some progress lately, and I've learned some...
Because my journey's a very niche journey. Like, there's only a very small handful of people that are going to really truly relate to it. But by expressing that very small, narrow journey that I've been on, hopefully there are elements of that affects people on a broader sense to feel like they're enabled to be able to feel safer, to be able to go, you know, fuck it.
I'm sure there's a percentage that applies to.
I'm going to be looking at a particular issue or story that one of the paid subscribers sent over to me about her own struggles in her practice, but also the other artists that we're going to be looking at in the piece. So in talking about these things, I am going to be discussing some themes around mental health and also some unseen physical struggles that some artists might go through. And if you're listening to this now and the idea of that is maybe suggesting any kind of intrusion into your well-being, how you're feeling today at this moment, you don't need to watch this right now, and I do support you flicking over if you're having any sense of that. Before we get into the heavy stuff, I wanted to talk about something positive here, something that's been supporting my own journey with pushing forward for a creative goal that I'm kind of trying to pull in on the horizon. And that's the sponsor of this video, which is Skillshare. When you join Skillshare, you'll have access to courses from animation to photography to graphic design and music, as well as their new offering of learning paths, where they gather a sequence of classes to give you a guided and tailored route on your own learning journey. Now, in my own experience, I can often be quite hard-headed in the way that I try and learn new skills, in a way that I just kind of often will drive at it on my own and be quite a trial and error learner. But at the moment, I've got this creative goal, learning some live mixing skills in order to take some of the ideas of the video editing work that I put out and actually be able to do that in a live environment. There's quite a lot of learning that needs to be done on my end before I can actually achieve that. And instead of just bullishly driving at it myself, I am finding it really useful to follow one of these Skillshare learning paths.
To DJ with. This DJ course is broken down for you.
The learning path is called Go From Beginner DJ to Mix and Master, and just like the previous classes I took on Ableton, such as the Ultimate Ableton Live series with J. Anthony Allen, I selected it because it looked really well structured, I liked the teaching style, the information felt dense enough to get stuck into, and the reviews from other users mentioned a lot of key learning points and things they got value from themselves. And with Skillshare's new class topics, including creative careers and creative inspiration, I really hope that some of this audience can find real value from what they're offering. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So go get started and take a look. It's absolutely free, and taking that journey will support both you and this channel. A huge thanks from me for anyone who follows through and checks that out there. And with that said, yeah, let's jump into the video.
Inciting incidents and preliminary frameworks.
You mentioned that there's a song about that moment when you're on the kitchen floor.
Yeah.
What role does that song play in this whole process? Does it come to LA to find peace? Does it rationalize and help you understand? Does what does that song mean?
I think it wasn't. I don't even know if it was catharsis. It was just to tell the story in its rawest form without sugarcoating it, just making it as much as a window and as much as a transparent window as it could be.
Okay, so last month I did a call out to my paid subscribers asking about any particular issues or struggles they might be facing within their creative work, and I had a lot of great responses on that, including this one that we're going to look at today. What I'm trying to do with this subscriber story, but also with the other artists, is try and leave the things that they're saying as whole as possible. With that said then, I'm just going to read this response that the subscriber, who's called Carly, sent over just as it came over to me. Hi Will, I saw your message on Patreon and wanted to drop you a line with a question that I don't know is something you might consider. I've spent most of my life managing my mental health, or not managing it lol, and I'm currently going through a diagnosis for ADHD after years and years of drug and alcohol addiction, perfectionism, burnout and a lot of creativity along the way. I know this might not be a subject you want to tackle. I know that you've touched on it a lot in some videos with addiction and so on, but I would love to hear about some artists and the same struggles with mental health, addiction, and how in some ways it can at times be a blessing and a curse. I genuinely am aware of how my mental health has helped me in ways with what I do as a full-time content creator, yet it would be great to see how artists have overcome or managed similar issues, and also you and their take on it. I think with ADHD, the main issue that always arises for me is I feel I am not where I could be, in brackets wasted potential, as so much of my time is spent procrastinating out of perfectionism or managing my mental health to just keep going, creating. I truly love the work you do, so thanks for all the content, Carly. So if you know anything about this channel and the work that I enjoy doing here, you can probably see why this struggle, this issue that Carly, was kind enough to share, just felt like something that would be really interesting to dig into. I also recognised that maybe I could use some of my own experience to help me just frame up how I want to maybe discuss this, and frame up some ideas that I want to use as a lens to look at the other artists we're going to look at in this video. So in terms of my experience, I'm diagnosed OCD, which is something that I am able to manage, has been at different levels at different times in my life. But I've talked previous on this channel and written a little bit about how it's through the lens of OCD that I see a real relationship with some of the slightly obsessive and also insular experience that my brain can exist in, and that relates to my creative work so greatly as well.
When you're deep in the middle of something now, you still disappear for days or long stretches?
Oh, I disappear internally for about 3 years, or as long as it takes. And I'm just a puppet who says certain set phrases and eats when reminded. Yeah.
Framework 1. On absorption.
So the piece I wrote on my newsletter was titled something like How OCD is a Storyteller's Dream. And what I mean when I say that is that my experience of OCD personally is that it's kind of, in a way, all been about storytelling. See, when little bits of uncertainty might come up in my brain where other people might just kind of keep on moving through their day and let it go, the OCD part of the brain can latch onto those things and create powerful stories. This will manifest in quite an insular experience in my mind, maybe going through different arguments for why something does or doesn't matter. The reason I'm telling you this is because of how that process links so directly with why I love writing, why I enjoy exploring ideas through story. I do really feel that a lot of the strengths that I've developed in that comes from, a similar place, or has been strengthened even through the kind of tools that those negative OCD experiences have actually given me.
Framework 2. A desire to bridge the gap.
So the second thing that I wanted to take a look at here is this idea of our personal struggles, perhaps unseen struggles, causing a kind of disconnection between your own experience and the world. A kind of drive, a kind of impetus to find a way that we can bridge the gap. Our art, our creative work, giving us that tool whereby we can actually find the ability to communicate experiences that we're having that aren't necessarily so easily done through everyday life and the normal ways we might communicate with each other. Now, I hope by kind of just explaining my own experience there before we get into these other artists, it hasn't gone too far away from Carly's own exploration of her experience there. But in some ways, I think it is useful to recognise that although there are places where we can relate to each other, in no way am I trying to set up any sense of making exact comparisons between, the experiences of two different people. I said at the top around my own OCD that I'm actually in a place where I can manage it and I can speak in this way about it in terms of feeling positive about how the tools that it's given me actually inform my creative work. But I think it's key to say here that kind of agency that I'm expressing over the struggle that I'm dealing with, it's not always the case for some people that the things they're dealing with, they're going to feel that sense of agency over them.
Ren talks so powerfully about his struggles with chronic illness and mental health. Find a link bank for Ren interviews in the free companion newsletter.
You don't know when it's going to stop, if ever. And then life seems a bit pointless because you see, all the people that I grew up with doing their thing, getting married, getting jobs, doing the thing, and I didn't really have a 20s, so it was it's quite difficult, but it feels, despite the element of PTSD that I think it's really important for me, because I'm probably a lucky, very small percentage of people who have managed to climb out of that place, and some people don't ever climb out of that place. So it's really important for me to tell their story in hopes that more awareness comes and in hopes they don't feel alone.
I want to jump into the first story here, and that's looking at one of my favourite writers, Hilary Mantel, and her own experience of her unseen struggles and how that actually went on to inform really powerful work.
Hilary Mantel, A Place Apart.
If I wanted to be a writer, Hilary Mantel tells us, I didn't have to worry about inventing my material. I'd already got it. The next stage was just to find some words. So this first story that I want to look at in terms of Hilary Mantel here, to be honest, it's quite a devastating thing to read, the struggle that she went through as a relatively young person, her physical struggle, which was undiagnosed endometriosis.
What I would have liked was a choice in life. Leisure, to reverse my earlier decision that children didn't matter to me. Leisure to ask if circumstances or my mind had changed. No one can predict that the game will be over for them at the age of 27. And now that an era of my life is over, and my school friends are becoming grandmothers, I miss the child I never had. What's to be done with the lost, the dead, but write them into being?
Now, in my mind, Hilary Mantel is undoubtedly one of the great writers of our time. She's won the Booker Prize twice, but scrapping all of that, just go and read some of her historical fiction and you'll witness a writer who has so deeply been able to submerge themselves in that creative act that the result carries such weight and a sense of reality that it's more like a world that's been cast by a magician than something willed into being through a normal imaginary human act.
I'm not conscious anymore of separate drafts. And I don't think I've thought in those terms ever since I started writing on the screen, which was way, way back in the mid-80s. And what I do now is work over everything I write intensely, maybe 20 times, 30 times, but I do it in blocks of scenes rather than chapters. When I've created a dramatic structure, then it's important for me to look at it as a structure, but also to look at it sentence by sentence. And if necessary, if difficulties come, then to read aloud, because if you have a lapse or falling away in rhythm or energy, then that is what will give you your solution.
What Hilary Mantel went through was an extreme level of internal pain that went worse than unseen by the medical profession, as she was not only not given the kind of help that she needed, but she went through a lot of doctors and psychiatrists prescribing her kind of drugs that would affect her mental state. Mantel's young life there at the time became completely changed by the physical symptoms. She fell away from her previous professional aspirations and into a state of great pain, great confusion, and alienation.
The visitor's idea of hospital is different from the patient's idea. Visitors imagine themselves trapped in that ward, in that bed, in their present state of assertive well-being. They imagine being bored, but boredom occurs when your consciousness ranges about, looking for somewhere to settle. But the patient's concentration is distilled, moment by moment. Breathing, not being sick, not coughing, or else coughing in the right way. The visitor sees the hospital as needles and knives, metal teeth, metal bars, sees the foggy meeting between the damp summer air outside and the overheated exhalations of the sick room. But the patient sees no such contrast. She can't imagine the street, the motorway. To her, the hospital is this squashed pillow, this water glass, this bell pull, and the nice judgment required to know when to use it.
One thing that did come out of that experience was the inception of her starting to seriously write fiction. And she talks in her writings about a short story that she started to form at that stage. The pain, the misunderstanding by the structures that she had hoped to rely upon, and this new life that she seemed to have to face on her own, a personal struggle and cutting off from the world that formed the impetus for her to begin to write her fiction in which the issues that she faced could be expressed in ways the world might hear. I was all right if I stuck with abstractions, ideas, images, Mantel writes. I had a job, but I needed a pursuit, I thought. I went to the library and got out a lot of books about the French Revolution, its casual cruelties, its heartless style. I thought, I know this stuff. By nature, I knew about despotism, the unratified decision, handed down from the top, arbitrarily enforced, the face of strength when it moves in on the weak. Here we see how Mantel's personal struggle not only created an environment where she had an urge to find abstractions from the world and dig into that kind of pursuit of writing fiction, but also allowed her an understanding of aspects of the human experience that she wouldn't have had if she hadn't been facing such, extreme events in her own life.
How much of this has ended up being reflected in your work and your writing? I mean, both the way you've been treated and perhaps dismissed at times as a patient, but also the pain and the difficulties that you went through as well.
Well, that's interesting because Writing about the illness itself, I have confined to my memoir. But, you know, the thing about being a novelist is you can draw material from all sorts of sources. As I move into the third book of the Cromwell trilogy, I'm looking at Henry, and people constantly ask, what went wrong with Henry? Did he have some rare disease? Was it that knock on the head he got in 1535? Did his personality undergo a huge change? And of course, what I know is, we do know Henry was in chronic pain. I know that what that does to degrade the personality, to detract from rationality. I think I can write about this well. I don't think it's quite as mysterious as people would believe if you understand what long-term pain does, both to the body and the mind. So, yes, I'll get a little something out of my experience, though it might seem very remote from Henry's.
Basquiat. A language of your own.
I know. I'd like to remain a little reclusive, and not be and be out there. To be brought up and to be brought down. Like they do to most of them.
We talked for some time of how he had always painted and how, as a child, he had dreamed of being a cartoonist. The only thing that has ever interested me, he said, is a blank page. I guess he was lost for his mother. His mother had taken him to art museums and used to paint with him in the afternoons, with both of them lying on the floor on their stomachs. The loss of his mother had left him with a great sadness. Even though she was now close by at the institution, she was far away from him in his mind. When we look at a lot of Basquiat paintings, we recognise his ability to create a style that draws people into a particular type of mental state. Through symbols, impressionist style images and language, Basquiat transports us into that kind of visceral experience that might replicate something of his own mental framework. In my last video covering Basquiat, which I'll link on the screen now, I looked into how he was misunderstood by many in the world around him. It might be too much falling into the media construction of Basquiat to say his work was a reaction against the culture and the way it pushed upon him, but in his misunderstanding by the world and the way it tried to box him in and define him, we can mark out some of the energy that led to his highly expressive and personalised work. His paintings were inspired by the jazz musicians and he felt akin to them. A lot of the early jazz artists, of course, couldn't even walk through the front door of the hotels and clubs they were playing in and had to enter through back doors and kitchens. And I think Jean felt this was a metaphor for his place in the white art world. He had entered through the back door. I remember the day that some buyer asked Jean for his CV. He was furious at first because, of course, he did not have one and had never studied anywhere, and I could tell that he suddenly felt a wall stopping him, but this only lasted a second. Then he tore out a piece of paper from a copybook that he liked to draw in and wrote something that was full of spelling errors and scratched out words. It was Jean's version of a CV. When he finished, he suddenly asked me, "Do you think they ever asked Picasso for his curriculum vitae?" "Of course not," I answered. He said that if anyone ever asked him for it again, he was going to give the measurements of his hand. We can see in this description of Basquiat how in this moment when he feels misunderstood or a pressure is pushed upon him from the mainstream American culture at the time, what pops out the other side is an expression of his personal voice and personal way that he might represent that thing that culture wants from him.
Is there any anger in you? Any anger in your
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is.
Talk about that. Tell me what the anger is. What are you angry about?
I don't remember. You know.
Now look, I'm going to be forward here about how I'm going to tiptoe around the issues of addiction that we see in Basquiat. In Basquiat's work, however, we can see clearly a highly driven artist who leans into a kind of immediacy of expression, and how an individual with that kind of visceral mental energy can level themselves out and find satisfaction, especially in a world where they're rejected from more mainstream ways of trying to do that, perhaps, is a question that can lead us to ideas of addiction or seeking of other states.
Jean-Michel. All right. So tonight after this really good meal, you know, I want to go to the movies, right? See Taxi Driver, which is like my favorite movie, I think. So I went to this movie on 48th and 8th, this theater. And then when I got there, I put my $10 in the window. The lady disappeared for a minute and came back, gave me back my $10 and said, "No music, man, this is serious."
It's a mistake.
Don't lift your legs. So I was like denied entrance to a movie theater, and you know.
Why? Why?
Which is, they said it was my appearance, you know, that I looked like a bum, you know. But it never happened to me before. I just sort of like.
Don't go to that movie theater.
In short, I
This is
guess
what
what I'm saying
now,
is,
right? This
when
is
you
my-
can't communicate with a world, or when a world doesn't seem to represent you or allow you a door in, that energy that you might have been able to get out in, you know, quote unquote, more normal or mainstream ways can be pushed in a lot of different kinds of directions. To be honest, I hope that you can hear that, yeah, I'm tiptoeing around this topic and that I am ignorant here. For this reason, I want to pass back to the text here that was written by someone who was very close to Basquiat. Everything was symbolic to him. How he dressed, how he spoke, how he thought, who he associated with. Everything had to be prolific, or why do it? And his attitude was always tongue-in-cheek. Jean was always watching himself from outside of himself and laughing. He tried to make people notice him, wake them up by using a symbol out of context. He never took anything as it was. Any idea, any belief, any norm was very quickly examined and used in his art. Sometimes, after a session of watching several silent movies, he would be quiet for hours and just mime to me anything that he wanted or wanted to say, and the apartment would be filled with a strange, quiet feeling as if we were underwater. Again, I don't want to frame this too much to close on Basquiat here, but I really would recommend going and checking out the book that those extracts are taken from, which is called Widow Basquiat. If you are interested in that part of Basquiat's life and what maybe his experience was like, more so, and how that maybe led into the kind of way that he expressed himself creatively. Yeah, that Widow Basquiat is a really kind of personal look, really close, intimate look at that artist. So would definitely recommend going and checking that out.
Brian Wilson, of Inner Trouble and Transcendence.
Well, initially we wanted to do an album called Smile, which when we first began it, I had crazy ideas. I was smoking hashish, and the boys were smoking it. And we were laying on the floor singing. From laying on the floor, we put the microphones down on our heads, doing crazy things, and we got into a very strange bag. And we came across a song called Fire. Well, it so happens that a building burned down the same day we were doing that, down the street of the studio that we were doing the Fire tapes. I had the musicians wearing fire helmets. I had a guy bring in a bucket with burning wood to smell smoke in the studio. I mean, I was crazy. Anyway, I began to think that we started that fire somehow mystically, and we ended up destroying the tape, plus destroying a few others of the Smile tape. As a matter of fact, an album called 2020.
Brian Wilson's deep relationship with his art and his obsession in some way with that creative practice, or at least deep relationship with it, drove through that stereotypical boxed in sound of the Beach Boys and lifted it into a kind of transcendent space where it gives us a look into a beautiful and, compared to a lot of people, quite a kind of like altered state.
So will it be close to 15 Big Ones in terms of feel?
It will be close, but there are, like for instance, we have a song called My Solution, which is a very odd song that has strange chords, not regular triad chords. They're chords, the notes are bunched up, so it's one of our more far out left field things that we've done.
One of my favourite stories about Brian Wilson we're going to have a look at in this extract, and it's basically about how he got a load of sand put into his living room that would sit under his piano, so that when he was songwriting he could kind of have his feet in the sand. It's quite a specific thing to do. Let's get into the extract. He also talked his wife Marilyn into accepting a sandbox in the dining room. This, he said, would inspire his songwriting. So it was that carpenters built a low retaining wall and filled it with about 8 tons of premium beach sand. In the middle of it all went Wilson's grand piano. When Wilson moved to Bel Air, Mrs. Wilson made sure that the indoor beach was left behind. Journalists often cite this anecdote as evidence of Wilson's weirdness, but as he later pointed out, he did write some great music with his feet in the sand. Make no mistake, I'm not trying to say there's any glamour to a lot of the pain that Brian went through and struggle that Brian Wilson went through, and it's not necessary that he fell into, his deep addiction problems. Maybe he could have accessed a different type of support and had a very different journey, and that's not to say it would have taken away from the creative work that he was able to put out.
I was taking drugs, I was snorting cocaine, which I don't agree with. I mean, I don't get behind anyone snorting cocaine. It's a very bad drug. But I did, and I did it. I had a lot of money. Of course, I'm a millionaire, and I was able to get a hold of all these drugs, and they I was able to get a hold of all these drugs, and they messed me up. They messed my mind up. My wife called a doctor, Dr. Gene Landy, and I began a series of experiments with them for rehabilitation and social control and social grace, and a series of therapy meetings, and it's done me a lot of good, and I've stayed off the drugs and come back into my own, and between my wife, the doctors, and my brothers and my mother and a couple friends, they all convinced me to get out of my room, get back in there in the studio and get to work, which I did, and I'm very grateful for, because it's making me a lot of money. And it's making people happy, which is my first goal, to make people happy.
And if you want to look more deeply into this story, and if you want a really, really good biopic that looks into this story and looks into the art he made, his relationship with mental health and his struggles and that journey, then I'm going to link Love and Mercy, the film about Brian Wilson, which is, a really, really great example of a biopic about a musician in this way. Aside from anything we can put negative or positive judgments on Wilson's journey and all the different ways that could have taken him, it's undeniable that his specific mental framework created some great work of his own, and also had a huge influence on the culture and a lot of the music that came out at that time and has subsequently come out as well. Look, I think this is going to be quite a long video by now, and I'm going to bring it to a close here. Thanks again to Carly for putting out her own personal journey there. Carly has her own podcast, and that's going to be linked below in the description. Thanks also to any of the other paid subscribers who got back to me with There are other responses. I've got them all lined up, and I'll be going through and making videos that covers each of them. You know, they're all great. So thanks again for sending over those responses. Do check out the Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel, the work I do, and having that line of communication through to me as well. If you have anything that you're trying to learn at the moment to support your own creative practice, then that Skillshare link's there below for the month's free trial of that if you want to check it out. The other thing is I put out my short EP. I made a few videos recently about building that EP, but I also just put the EP out last week, and that will be linked below also. So yeah, load of stuff to explore there if you're interested. And with all that said, peace. Hope you enjoyed this one. Good luck in your work until next time, and speak soon.